What exactly is policy? So policy is the big picture. It's the analysis of the big picture. Most of what we do in learning is micro-oriented. It's usually cutting down and going into pieces. We read the Chumash by verses, and we analyze verses. We analyze statements. We analyze in halacha. We are working on the details, and specific details, and so forth. What we don't get is a big picture. Like, how many people actually sit there and before they learn psukim, they read the whole section first and say, hey, let me get the whole story here. How do people understand getting the whole picture before they go on? In halacha, do we even understand that there's a big picture that presupposes our investigation of the halacha? A lot of people don't understand it. They think every halacha is individual thing and so forth, and we don't understand that there's a bigger context in terms of our various discussions, even in details. So the point is, and it comes out from certain viewpoints and how we make decisions in halacha. It's a very broad discussion. So what I want to do tonight is I want to talk a little bit about policy, okay, and this whole concept of policy. And to give you an example of how I want to start with this, I'll give you machlokas. So I mentioned this on the Nishma policy blog, okay. And if you want to get to that blog, you just Google Nishma policy, or go to our regular blog, Nishma blog, and there's a link to Nishma policy. But the first entry from the blog is the following case. There's a machlokas in the Gemara Makot. Okay, there's a Mishnah in Makot. There's a famous Mishnah in Makot that says that a court, basically a court that killed once in 70 years, was considered to be a hanging court. Famous thing, a lot of Jews like to say, we have a lot of laws about execution in the Torah. A lot of things about everyone kill this, mochumat here, mochumat there, you do this, you get killed, so on and so forth. But the fact is, the Jewish evidentiary law made it almost impossible to convict him. You had to have 2 eyewitnesses, and they had to warn the person. I mean, there's a lot of tremendous details in evidentiary law. The fact is, though, we have a statement in the Mishnah that says the actual statement is a court that executes once in 7 years, or a court that executes once in 70 years is considered to be like a hanging court. Okay, it's pretty rare, and the way that's usually quoted is once every 7 years. So the fact is it's a very interesting issue over there. Then there's a machlokas in the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon make a following statement. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon lived after there were no more capital punishment cases in the Jewish world. The Gemara, I forget where the Gemara is, but the Gemara says that 40 years before the Churban Bayis Sheni, right, there were no more capital cases tried in Jewish courts, because in Jewish courts, in the rules of court procedure, the only time a Jewish court can carry out an execution or decide a capital punishment case is when the Sanhedrin, when the Supreme Court sat in what's called the Lishkas Hagazit. Lishkat Hagazit was a chamber of hewn stone. That's its actual translation, and basically it was a chamber in the Beis Hamikdash, on the Temple Mount, the Beis Hamikdash.
Lishkat
Hagazit, hewn stone, cut stone, right? So the fact of the matter is, in this Lishkat Hagazit, in this chamber of hewn stone, that's where the Sanhedrin had to sit. It's the same thing, for example, to give you an idea in terms of procedure. Let's say in Canada, a parliament is only convened when the mace is on the table. Okay, so you'll have situations where the speaker will say, put the mace under the table. And when they put the mace under the table, the big long thing that they which is the Speaker of the House, the custodian house is supposed to carry, be in charge of the mace, whatever. The mace is put under the table. Even if everyone is in the room and everyone's sitting in the same seat, it's no longer considered to be a meeting of the parliament. Okay, what they then say is this is now a committee of the whole. but it's not officially a parliament. So they make a decision that's a decision that's supposed to be through a decision of the parliament. Let's say the House of Commons, according to Canadian law. Okay, if they make a decision, it's not considered to be a decision of the House of Commons. It has to be on the table. So we have something similar. We have something that to be a Sanhedrin, to be a functioning Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin has to sit in Lishkas HaGazit. And if the Sanhedrin is not sitting in Lishkas HaGazit, then no court can carry out capital punishments. Okay? 40 years before Korban Bayis Sheni, the Sanhedrin moved out of the Lishkas HaGazit. Okay? Therefore, there were no more capital punishments. Why they moved out is fascinating. The Gemara says they moved out because there was an increase in you would think it was because they didn't want to execute anyone. The fact is, they said there was an increase of murders in the Jewish world, so they decided we better move. It seems like very strange. It was a response to an increase in murder that they said, okay, we're going to take away the right to capital punishment. It's a fascinating Gemara, but I didn't want to deal with it right now.
That is interesting.
Right, yeah, it is. Okay, maybe sometime in the future I'll deal with it. The fact is, though, so they had this thing about in the Lishkas HaGazit, so they moved away. So Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva could never have had a capital punishment case. Okay, because Rabbi Akiva lived, in Bar Kokhba, that's 140, and the Sanhedrin moved from Lishkas HaGazit from 30. And even though there's a lot of people say Rabbi Akiva lived to 120 years old, the point is, even if he lived to 120 years old, it means he was born when he was 20. So in 20 CE. So the fact is that and they moved in 30. So there's no way Rabbi Akiva ever tried a capital punishment case. But he says, if I ever was on a court that dealt with a capital punishment case, I would never execute anyone. So Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, both said we would never execute anyone. They'd be able to always find a loophole to never execute anyone. Now, there's other ways of taking care of some of these people. But the fact is, they would never execute. Doesn't mean a person would simply go free. However, so Rabbi Shimon Gamliel responds to him and says, if you did that, you'd be marba rotzchem b'Yisrael. You'd increase the murderers in Israel. So he obviously thinks there's a need to capital punishment. The essence of that argument is a very interesting argument. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon is basically saying that pursuant to Jewish law, I could always find a way to get someone off the hook. I can always find a loophole, right? Which means that even if I get down and find the guy did something or something like that, I can always find a technicality to get him off the hook. And something is telling him that I will always find a technicality. I don't want to be a person who judges someone to execution. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying, yeah, I know. He's not denying that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon are absolutely right. I know you could do that if you wanted to, but it's not right. You shouldn't do it because it will increase murders. What you have is a classic policy disagreement. Okay, and it's not halachic. It's not technically halachic. Right? No one's denying the fact that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon had the ability to do this. And no one's denying the fact that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel could have said, listen, we don't check out the loopholes like that. The point is they're talking about the context of how they're going to follow the law. And they're saying, listen, there's a bigger thing, and it tells me how I'm going to apply the law. Let me give you another example. Okay, and it's like a lot of people use the term meta halachic to present this. Let me give you another example. There was a case that Rav Hershel Schachter brings down a case. See, what happens in this case is Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon are basically making a statement that says how I'm going to look for Hecht Torah or for Chumrah. Okay, in other words, there's a question, for example, when you're asked to Shalah, how much effort are you going to look for a Hecht Torah and how much effort are you not going to look for a Hecht Torah? So I'll give you an example. So there was a woman who was going out with a Kohen, and for certain reasons, the prima facie argument was that she not married a Kohen. Okay, she was usher to a Kohen. So the point is that the Shalit came to Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. So Rav Hershel Schachter tells a story that the Rav stayed up all night trying to find a heter. Worked hard to find a heter. And the story goes that the next day when the Rav's Shamish walked into his apartment to see how he's doing next morning, see how things are going. Right, that's the person who basically helped out the Rav during the day and so forth, usually one of his top students. He came in and he saw the Rav was totally disheveled. He was ready to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital. And the Rav did not go to sleep. He said the Rav looked terrible. And the Rav was so distressed. He said, I couldn't find the heter. Could not find the heter. Could not find the heter. So he really felt, this is it. But he was so motivated to try and find the heter. Okay? Why? Because the Rav believes in something in terms of romantic feelings and so forth and so forth. He really wanted to say, listen, let's try and find a heter for this woman. The same way in the case of a guna. A woman is a woman who technically cannot remarry. So there clearly is a policy concept over there. You look for a heter for that case. Okay, that's a policy idea. If you can't, find a heter. If you can't, you can't. But you find a heter. So the case arose with that I was involved in a case where a woman theoretically couldn't marry Cohen, and I knew them, and they asked me a shayla if there's any way they could work something out and so forth to get married. So the truth is, there was myself and another rabbi involved, and this other rabbi who was involved was very close to another gadol. Okay, and I said, so why don't you go speak to the other gadol? Okay, get his opinion on it. And he says, you really don't know this other gadol, do you? You go up to him and said, basically, they can't get married. He would basically say, so let him find another girl. There's always another bus coming, and so let him find another girl. So why? Because he didn't have the same perception of romance as the Rav did. Okay, so the Rav had a certain concept from the meta halacha or the policy concept with marriage is about. So he says, I'm going to work hard to find a heter for this couple to get married. Another Rav could say, listen, it's asur. Why should I try and find a heter for her? No, go marry someone else. Had a completely different perception of the relationship. That's a policy consideration. It has a lot to do with how you can be motivated to find heterim or not. Okay, it's a whole perceptions. These questions come up all the time. It comes up, for example, also when you know there's a few different opinions. There's a lenient opinion and a stringent opinion, and you'll make a decision whether you're going to go with the lenient opinion or the stringent opinion. Okay, one classic example of that is a divorced woman where she has to cover her hair or not, right? So the question emerges is that there's a whole thing where she should, but there's always when it comes to divorced woman, there's a lot of arguments to say a divorced woman doesn't have to cover her hair. Okay, even though there's a prima facie statement that the Shulchan Aruch says she should. So the questions emerge. So Ramosha even paskin once. There was a woman who basically, I guess this was the 50s, she had to make a parnasa for her family, for her kids, and so forth and so forth. And she knew that she'd have a hard time getting a job if she wore a wig. She knew she had to. So Ramosha says, okay, so go for it. You don't have to cover your hair. You got to make a parnasa, right? You got to raise your kids. One of the classic situations is a woman who basically says, I want to get remarried, and I don't feel beautiful. I don't feel I'll be able to be attractive if I feel I'm giving off the wrong signal. Everyone think I'm married, and if I'm wearing a wig, and it will affect my ability to arrange dates and shidduchim. So a lot of people say, no question about it. You don't have to cover your hair anymore. You have a reason. So this situation came up once, and a woman was asked a shayla, and they said, okay, heter. And this other woman came over to her and says, yeah, I know you have a heter, but do you really want to rely upon a heter? It's giving this impression that if you ever have a heter, it's always wrong. The woman was talking a very simplistic policy perception. There's certain times where you have to follow the heter. You give a heter because it's the right thing to do. Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel didn't say who's more lenient, who's more stringent. They both had value consciousness. And they both said, this is 100% right from my perspective, this is 100% right from my perspective. Okay? And the fact is, behind it was your policy perspective. And this is an area of Jewish thought and Jewish focus of Jewish besides Jewish thought, of Jewish action or Jewish behavior that's not investigated. It's really not studied. The big picture and understanding what your value conscious is that creates the big picture that creates your analysis of the halacha. Okay, and there's a lot of issues on this. Okay, and it's coming up more and more, where a lot of cases you'll have people sit there and say, I have a halachic argument to say this is mutter, and the other person saying, yeah, gee, I can't challenge your halachic argument, but you still shouldn't rely upon that heter. And the other person is saying, yes, I'm relying upon it. The other person says no. And it's because of a policy disagreement. This is very much in the world of certain aspects of women's laws, but it deals with Eretz Yisrael. It deals with a lot of issues. What is your policy consideration that you look at the halacha for? Obviously, policy is developed from the halacha. You come to halachic conclusions, but as you get the halachic conclusions, they give you a context for further investigation of the halacha. Okay, and you basically understand that it's actually halachically forbidden. You obviously can't go against the halacha, but there's a lot of areas where you try and figure out, well, I can find a heter, should I really work that way, or so on and so forth. That's one aspect of policy. Another aspect of policy that I'm becoming focused on is looking at subjects in a holistic way. Okay, in other words, a lot of times when people make decisions, they do so in very particular way. They do so in a very chopped up way. They'll ask the shaila and they won't understand all the repercussions to a shaila, or all the different connotations of the shaila. The last situation is this mutar asar, and they don't recognize that whatever answer you give to this is going to have an effect on a whole variety of other matters. Okay? Guys, yeah, okay, let me try to give you an example of that before I get to the one I really want to focus on tonight. But let me give you a try and give you another example. It's just a matter where how you paskin is going to have effects beyond the narrow definitions of the law as you see it.
Chalav Yisrael.
Well, Chalav Yisrael is a policy issue. There's policy issues: do you do it, do you not do it, how it's going to be affected, so forth and so forth. But that's an interesting perspective. If you're somewhere, or let me give you another example. Let me give you an example similar like this. Okay. I'm trying to think. Chalav Yisrael would be an interesting issue. If you're makbid on Chalav Yisrael in a situation that can have repercussions that are negative other ways. Okay? Well, I'm thinking like this. If you're... pardon? Yeah. Let me
years ago. Has social implications, has implications to restaurateurs.
Well, let me give an example. In terms of some of the laws that deal with our relationships with non-Jews, okay? So you can look at some of the laws and apply them. If you don't use a seichel to understand that as you consider those laws, you have to consider the policy consequences of the laws beyond the narrow definition of the law, it's a problem. So if you come across a statement that says, you know that you're going to say, I can't eat something, right? Because it's for whatever reason, and the fact is, there's a lot of halachic issues about it, and you not eating this thing can possibly create a real social stigma against you. Now, sometimes you may be reading more into it, and the person will say, "Oh, I understand. I'll respect your values," and so on and so forth. But other times, a person will be very upset by it. Okay, I'm thinking also in terms of shaking hands. Let's say, for example, if a man's about to shake hands with a woman, or the non-Jewish woman, and the man refuses to shake hands, and the woman takes it as a tremendous insult. Well, the point is yes, there's halachic issues about it, and I'm not going to say it's always permitted. I'm not giving a blanket statement, but I'm saying that knowing the bigger question is that it's not just an issue of shaking hands with this woman, it's an issue of the bigger context. How will people look at this? This is actually a question that came up with Rabbi Haskell Gluckstein and the Obama administration. This is an example of policy consideration. Haskell Gluckstein is a Rav in New York. He's a senior Rav. He's an older man. He's a major Rav of the RCA. I think he was the president of the RCA and so forth and so forth. And when Obama became president, he invited clergymen from each of the branches of Judaism to be at his inauguration service. I think it was like a religious service in a church or whatever. So he invited a conservative rabbi, a Reform rabbi, and an Orthodox rabbi. The Orthodox rabbi who was invited was Rabbi Haskell Gluckstein. So there was a tremendous amount of discussion about this because he went. Rabbi Gluckstein went. And there was a tremendous amount of uproar over this. Okay, there was a whole discussion. He was a member of the RCA, discussion by the RCA. And basically, Rabbi Gluckstein said, I happen to know, my Rebbe is Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, it's a Rav. I happen to know the Rav would totally agree with me doing this, right? Because the fact of the matter is that he had a chance to actually say hello to Obama who was there. The point of the matter is if you looked at it, and I'm not saying there's halachic issues back and forth, it's a matter of can you go to church, not go to church, is a whole variety of things, but the fact of the matter is, he looked at it and said, hey, here's the President of the United States inviting an Orthodox rabbi there. If we don't go, right, he'll perceive to be the only representative of the Jewish community will be Reform and conservative rabbis. We snubbed him, right? Now, the point is because I was there, and now he knows my face, and now he knows that he can relate to us and so forth. So he felt that there were policy considerations that made him do it. Now, those policy considerations then affect how he looks at the halacha. But the point is that they don't affect the way he looks at the halacha in an incorrect way. They set the context of the halachic analysis, and they bring out all the different perceptions. But the fact is, it's not just one of the things is not just a specific decision. Can you go into a church for a service, right? Bill Smith, Chaim Yankel comes over and he says, "Hey, my friend's getting married, in the church. Can I go to the thing?" That's a different question, right? Other questions is that a Gioris comes to you and says, one of my parents passed away and the funeral's in the church. Can I go? So I've had that shaila and said yes, and when I said I asked someone else bigger than me, and he said for sure yes. And there was an issue, but the fact is that those are knowing the greater perception. But in this case, but that still was private. In this case, he was looking at situations. There's a policy consideration here. This is the leader of the country, of the free world. It has to be a context in the analysis. So the truth is, that's where policy comes in. Policy determining, when you're going to be matir, when you're not going to be matir, when you're allow it, not allow it to be considerations, when it's really correct to be matir, when you see all the repercussions of your decision. And all the extensions. So you have people, you're passing over this, you only look at Hilul Shabbos, and you come to one decision, but then you understand it's a much broader perception. And you take it all the way and say, wait a second. Not that he can tell you to go against the halacha. The reason a lot of people shy away from this is because of the conservative world perception of the conservative Judaism looks at policy to an extent that was problematic in the eyes of many of the Orthodox. And there was, in the original founding of the conservative movement, the original conservative movement, the distinction between them and the Orthodox was very limited. They both were halachis. But the conservative movement was beginning to say, listen, we can make policy considerations into the halacha, and we'll do a lot. So the fact is they were motivated by policy considerations to an extent that was not acceptable within Orthodox halachic analysis. But that doesn't mean there's no policy analysis in the halacha. There is, and the fact is we've lost sight of that. People don't see the big picture. And they also don't know how to build a big picture. Like I gave a simple one here, like hey, it's not just about the church, it's about dealing with the President of the United States. So the fact is that the first analysis I did this on the Nishma policy blog was on orthodoxy and homosexuality. And the reason that I started with that one is because I was involved in the topic, obviously, but it's one of those things where if you look at all the aspects that's been involved with this, there are so many different issues. And everyone is focusing on one issue or another, and they're not understanding how there's so many different connotations to this issue. So what I did in the policy blog is I divided the issue into 4 subcategories. Okay, and they're all fascinating categories. One was dealing with the individual, the private issue of how does orthodoxy deal with the homosexual individual, and that really creates a whole issue. Is that you're talking a person who has the drive or the feelings, or a person who's actually acting upon them, which means that they're breaking the halacha. Then it's a question: how do you treat with other people who are offending the law? Is this different? Which are transgressing halacha? Is it different than another transgressor? Do you treat an individual who is transgressing the laws dealing with homosexuality any different than you treat with someone who's transgressing the laws of Shabbos? Okay, are there differences? Not differences? And there's a lot of interesting repercussions to this. For example, defining the line, it's very easy to say that there's a difference between the law of don't steal and the law of don't eat pork, right? You can see a distinction. If in shul a guy's eating pork, you say, listen, let's because the guy goes to McDonald's, I'm not going to tell him not to come into shul. But would you be as open to someone who says, I'm a cat burglar? The guy walks in and says, yeah, I steal all the time. Would you like to have him in your shul? Even if you have another person right beside you who may be eating at McDonald's, then you're a little bit okay with. But the cat burglar you're not so happy about. But the guy who's Bernie Madoff, you're not gonna be so happy to say, and forget I'm doing tshuva, not so happy.
You can have the distinction of being Adam l'makom and being Adam l'chavero, which is a whole different thing.
So is that the only distinction? So some people will say, see, that's a problem. You should have so much consideration for Ben Adam l'makom that you should be just as angry with the guy who eats Big Macs, because aren't you committed to God?
But isn't it a bigger transgression if it's being Adam l'chavero?
No, it's the other way around.
Really?
Well, that's a good question. Which is worse? It's very interesting when you say this. Something happened this week. Reminded me of a shir I once heard in Yerushalayim. Whenever I talk to my friends, the question was always, why does it really matter? Or whatever, university world or whatever. Why does it really matter whether you eat, what's this prohibition of not eating Big Macs? I'm a good person. What does it matter if I don't eat Big Macs or not? So therefore, you always have this argument that you try to show that if you follow these type of laws, it will have benefit in how you relate to other people. The Rambam's argument, for example, if you control your appetites, you'll be a better person because of it. Okay? But there's always was this perception, like you're saying, that that's better to have that Ben Adam l'chavero, laws between human beings are more significant than laws between man and God, because ultimately it's not, you can be a good person and eat Big Macs. I heard this person give a shir once. He totally inverted the whole concept. He was basically saying, he's telling people, he says, something, these laws between human beings, there are also laws between man and God. So you should be just as careful about those laws as you are about the laws that are directly between man and God. it seems he was talking to a population who was sort of implying that, of course I'm going to care about kashrus, of course I'm going to care about Shabbos. Stealing, it's only between man and man. It's not between like man and God. So this guy was saying another argument. No, you should be just as concerned about stealing because it's also between man and God. It's also one of God's laws. And when I heard this share, I said, "What is this? This is weird. This is so strange." But there are people who take that. People who really have that attitude. It's a lot to do with their desire for spirituality and their perception. It's a whole thing. But it's an example of a policy thing where people do it, and that's why you get things. So the truth of the matter is that Bernie Madoff would, while he was for tshuva, after they found out he was going to trial, if he said to you, "You know something? It's my mother's yurtzeit today." I don't know what his mother's yurtzeit. I'm assuming that his parents aren't alive, but maybe I'm being a little bit unfair. But let's assume this. He says, if he came up to you and said, "It's my mother's yurtzeit tonight. Where can I go? Where can I go say kaddish?" What do you think you'd do? If someone came up to you and said, "Listen, he's driving into
about his mother's soul."
Yeah, you'd sit there. If someone came up to you and said, "Hey, I just have to go over to McDonald's, grab a Big Mac, but can you tell me where I can go to shul? I want to say kaddish for a yurtzeit." You'd sit there and say, "Okay, it's a shul down. Okay, fine, it's all right. You can go say kaddish." But if Bernie Madoff came over to you and said, "Hey, I want to say kaddish tonight," what would you really do? Would it be so simple to say, "Yeah, sure, it's okay. We'll send you. There's a shul over there." You'd be a little bit upset by this. You may tell him, something. Take your kaddish and do something else with it. But it's like it might really bother you. Not that I'm saying that's what you should say, but that's the kind of policy issues you're dealing with. The fact is a holistic approach. So getting back to the homosexuality thing, what I said is that in this thing I found it very interesting in the sense that the first thing was the individual case. One of the things I started talking about, which now I got a response to, someone was very upset with me presenting, was it may demand a re-examination of the role of marriage in the consciousness of Jews. In the sense that a lot of times a lot of gay individuals feel totally alienated and totally not good because there's such a stress on the family and marriage in the Jewish world. Therefore they feel a lot of pressure. So there was an example given that I heard which seemed to imply that maybe one option is to stress and values in just having a fulfilling single life. Is that not a possibility also? So one person wrote, so I present that as a possibility as one way of dealing with the issue, which also would have effect in terms of heterosexual singles, because there's a tremendous problem with the singles community in the Orthodox world nowadays. And one of the issues is the fact that in many ways they're not accepted as full citizens because they're not married. So one guy wrote in a blog, he says, totally upset with this idea, saying, no, this is not it. We have a value of marriage, and that cannot be an option. That we lower the value of marriage. That's a policy discussion. It's a policy discussion that goes beyond the homosexual issue into how we deal with singles. And what you were nodding your head about is the fact that people do perceive people who are single not to be full citizens of the world. I know that there's something from Jews that if you have a single person who goes out there and has a nice apartment, a nice house, and actually goes and decorates their house as if it's their home, there's always this sort of strange type of thing, but they're not married. No one's actually going to say that, but there's this sort of, every single person. I know this is something that my kids tell me about. In the single community, it's like no one buys any real good furniture.
It's supposed to be temporary.
Yeah, everything's supposed to be temporary, right? So it's all part of that issue. So that's part of the issue. So that's an extension idea of analyzing how we are in terms of policy. That was one issue. The second issue I dealt with on the policy blog is the issue I call in terms of the Orthodox community. How's the Orthodox community going to respond to this? And the fact is that's because there's issues in terms of how we integrate this in terms of our community. For example, and people may not see this. For example, can a gay man join a horror dance, with other men, right? Okay. Or another question would be, is how do you deal with a dormitory where let's say this was a question the Army said.
Right.
Don't ask, don't tell. But the fact of the matter is now it's okay. But one of the issues is that it's a problem. It's very interesting because there's a cartoon up on YouTube. It's a cute little cartoon, and it's like this guy who's like a proud Orthodox gay individual. He's come out, the client says, I'm a proud Orthodox gay individual. So the guy is asking the question and says, excuse me, what mikveh do you use? And the guy, he asks the first question, where do you sit when you go to shul? The men's section and the women's section. He says, the men's section. What kind of question? I'm a man in the men's section. So, well, one of the reasons we have mechitza is so that you're not looking at the women because you get somewhat aroused. So how can you sit with the man if you're going to be aroused? Okay. So then the guy says, okay. So the guy answers, says, I can control myself. He says, okay, fine. So that was a bit of a problem because if he controls himself, then why isn't the onus on the man to be able to say they can control themselves in a mixed environment as well, which is part of the issue, and that's part of the issue in having mechitzas, whether you have mechitzas at weddings or not, and how far you control it. That's another policy issue. But the question that then came out is the person said, okay, so what mikveh do you use? And the guy said, I just told you I'm a man. I use the men's mikveh. So it's a cute little cartoon. It's two little bears saying, listen. And he was just being honest. He says, listen, if I went to a mikveh with a bunch of naked women there, I don't think I'd have the kind of thoughts I should have when I'm about to go into the mikveh. It's a purity. It's a holy thing. I don't think that's really. So how can you do it? So that's a second issue. How do we integrate gay individuals into the community, and how do we deal with these issues? And don't ask, don't tell in the American Army was a real issue, but part of the extension of that issue in the Jewish community is, what do you do in dormitories? Okay? Do you tell people, do you want people to say they're gay, not gay? A guy comes up to you and says, I'm going to yeshiva, and he tells you he's gay. So what do you do?
A roommate?
On one hand, who wants a roommate? On the other hand, you for sure don't want to put him in, but you can't put him with another gay person. Why can't you put him with another gay person?
Yeah.
It's
like being with a man and a woman.
Right, it's an issue yichud. Two gay men. It may be a gay man with a straight man. May also be a question of yichud. Yichud being the prohibition prohibition of two people who are halachically not able to have relations being alone in a room. So you're now faced with this issue. So you say, okay, so we start having private rooms in yeshivas. If you're gay, we'll give you private rooms. So now everyone's going to be gay. I'm gay. I like the private room with your own bathroom. That's what I want. Right? Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. The fact is that's a second issue. So it's a real issue. Okay. Then the third issue I developed into is it's also an issue in how we relate to other Jewish worlds. There was a big problem with federation last year. Okay, with the Gay Pride Parade.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it was a really big problem, right? And it was a real problem because the fact is you had an anti-Israel group, clearly an anti-Semitic group, which was marching the Gay Pride Parade against Israel.
Against Israeli, of course.
Right. And the fact is that so the Federation came out and said, listen, for the sake of Israel, we have to all go down there and march with the Jewish gay group against those anti-Israel gay groups. So here you had a call by Federation saying that in order to protect Israel, in order to fight for Israel, you should go march in the Gay Pride Parade, right? Which will be interpreted as being somewhat supportive of gay pride. No one's going to come down there and say, I'm only marching because of Israel, but I am really not in favor of the extension of, but I really am against same-sex marriages or whatever. I mean, no one's going to march like that. So the fact is, comes out. So okay, so you understand why Federation did it, because they failed. We're not Orthodox. We're not bound by these rules. So how does Orthodox institutions now respond to the Federation doing this? Okay, it's a real. So
problem.
that's an extension of that issue. And then finally, there's also the issue in terms of the general community. I mean, beyond the Jewish community, the general community. There was a legislation before the New York State legislature that was going to be a law that said that all educational institutions in New York State had to teach a tolerance class, which basically taught tolerance to accept different lifestyles. So if that would have went through, every yeshiva in New York State would have to teach a class talking about other religions' lifestyles and tolerance towards them. You know, so already there's a little bit of issue, like, I don't think yeshivas are really interested in teaching Buddhism and Christianity and Hinduism and stuff like that, and show tolerance toward that. Okay? But also, one of those things is the same-sex couple and different lifestyles. So what's the official term for it? The modern family, the acceptance of different family structures. See, they say, okay, so here we are with a bunch of guys in yeshiva, and, nice Hasidic yeshiva in Williamsburg, and they say, okay, today we're going to teach about how you have a same-sex couple who are able to adopt, and then I mean, it's a real tough situation. So luckily that bill was defeated in the legislature, but that was a real issue.
That would also be an issue for the Christians and
Totally.
Muslims.
Totally. So that leads to something else. There's actually an organization called PATH, which is a companion of various different groups who are trying to respond to homosexuality. Most of these groups believe in what's called reparative therapy, which is that you can change someone from homosexual to being heterosexual, which is a controversial issue, but there's also no evidence totally against it. It's one of these things where maybe it can work, maybe it can't, I don't know what the psychology. Now you have a movement. The APA says homosexuality is not an illness, but the fact is I'm sure up until the 1970s there was part of therapy that says you can move someone from being homosexual to heterosexual.
I think if it worked, a lot of people would do it, and so I think it.
Yeah, there are cases where it works, doesn't work. I mean, you hear arguments both ways. There's a Jewish organization called Jonah, and if you're ever in touch with them, they'll introduce you to people who are worked. Okay, and they have nice families and they have fine relationship with their spouse and so forth. So, and there's other cases where it doesn't work. I'm not going to deal with the issues and so on. But the truth is that itself is part of the halachic issue, part of the policy issue. Okay, as a Jew, you have to believe it can work. Okay, because then you have to deal with the issue of what's this drive doing here. And then there's further questions in policy where it comes to an idea that in Jewish thought there's no drive that's created that doesn't have a purpose. That's why there's a Gemara that says if you're born under the sign of Mars, which means you have an aggressive tendency or you have a bloodlust or something like that, says so rather than being a Rotzeach, a murderer, you should become a Shoichet, a slaughterer, or a moil. Or a circumciser, because you right.
So we made that comment in class.
Okay, yeah, I made that comment in class. Yes. The fact is that everyone says, hey, wait a second, I'm not doing that again, like the old bin circumciser. Okay, so the fact is that the point is every drive is supposed to have a purpose. What's this drive's purpose? Therefore, one of the arguments must be that the drive must have some heterosexual aspect to it, so there's got to be some movement of it. The truth is, there's a lot more issues of it. The fact is that I personally think, just to the aside, is that the role of sexuality in love is not touched upon enough. See, I think one of the bigger problems is the fact that we don't understand the connection of the sexual drive to the relationship drive. Okay, in our society, that's basically, I think, comes a lot out of a Christian perspective. In Christianity, the sexual drive is deemed to be secondary, not just for secondary, but a degraded form of love, because they believe that the sexual drive is basically You're not loving the other person. Basically, you're using the other person. The other person is the satisfier of your lust, and that's why they used to talk about the greatest type of love was in the Middle Ages was considered to be the celibate love, the woman who you loved but you didn't touch, because that was pure love, because you didn't touch her and therefore you didn't use it to satisfy your drives, and that was very much part of it. Therefore, celibacy became love, and that's why the model of that love was motherly love. The motherly love was the highest form of love. From a Jewish perspective, the highest form of love is the love between spouses, right? The husband-wife relationship. The idea of being connected, which obviously has a strong sexual connotation to it. There's not enough analysis of. There are some ideas to explain how the sexual drive is connected to the love drive. Okay? Because if you understand, just because you're attracted to someone sexually, why does that mean you want to have a relationship with that person? But somehow, from a Jewish perspective, it does. And the fact that you feel sexually attracted to someone is a reflection of love. So that's not done enough of that analysis. And then the truth is that Steve Greenberg, the person who was ordained as a rabbi at YU, who then came out of the closet and declares himself to be the first Orthodox gay rabbi. He says that when he was in Gush Etzion, he learned in Gush Etzion, he wanted to go. This should not be in any way attacking Gush Etzion. Steve happens to be a very bright guy, and he was learning, and he's involved in learning and so forth and so forth. And he got to speak from YU because when he went, he was very concerned about his drives. He felt that he was bisexual at the time, so he wanted to know what to do, which I respect. He didn't want to ask anyone in his community because he felt that he was too close to people. So he went to Rav Elyashiv. So he said he went to Rav Elyashiv and asked to speak to him, and he asked Rav Elyashiv what to do. He says, I am bisexual. So, and Rav Elyashiv said to him, you are given two parts of love. Use it wisely, which seems to imply that there's something about sexual attraction even to the male that has something to do with love as well. So it's a very fascinating concept that's being presented there. The fact is we don't do enough work on what really is the underlying Torah perspective on the relationship of love and sexuality.
But it's a lot easier, I would think, to go and say I have a problem, I'm bi, than I'm totally gay, because it gives more of a choice if you're bi. So it's not a really...
He actually says that. He thinks he was always gay, but he basically said that way because he didn't want to confront that problem. The truth is, though, what it comes down to is that there's a real big problem, because if it is that you are gay, from what I'm saying is that the Torah says, or our view, is that especially in a certain perspective of Jewish philosophy that basically says every drive has a purpose, then what do you do with this drive? Because this drive doesn't seem to have a purpose. So therefore, one of the answers, it must be a purpose that has the drive must be just generic sexual, and the way is homosexuality is a deviant manifestation of the drive, so therefore it can go to we can direct it to heterosexuality. Therefore, that's the argument, and the organization such as Jonah has some success with this. They have people that they have run programs with, and so forth, in terms of this idea. Why I started going off on this tangent was because Jonah belongs to a group called PATH, P-A-T-H, and it's a bunch of other groups who hold the same viewpoints, and most of them are religious. Right, this Christian group, that Christian group, who want to help people who are gay be heterosexual or dealing with this. And Pat says as one of their objectives is to offer change or to offer people to have to live fulfilling single non-sexual lives. But obviously we share these attitudes, so that raises a new policy issue. How much do we want to relate to non-Jewish people that we happen to overlap with on this one issue, and concern for where we may not overlap, which is a similar issue in terms of Israel. How much do we want to relate to fundamentalist Christians that are pro-Israel? Okay, now, when I expand this out, what I've done is I've taken an issue and expanded it out. Okay, you see all the repercussions to it. A lot of people want to narrow it down. Look at this is one case. They're and look at it in a very particular, segregated way. We break things down. We see things in sort of like particular views in terms of their specifics. This case, that case, this halacha, that halacha. We don't get the big picture and understand how we make a decision over here is going to affect making a decision over there. There's an interesting thing about this also, which I pointed out in another thing that I wrote, but actually I didn't make this specific point out, but I pointed it out in general, and this is a good example of it. There was an article I believe in the Wall Street Journal by Rabbi Shmuel Boteach, right? Okay, and Shmuel Boteach came with an article about how we have to start treating gays, and we have to recognize he was more to the welcoming side and so forth and so forth. But he made a statement there that says, so they can do 611 mitzvot. What he basically means is okay, they're not going to do they're going to have their gay relationships, which is obviously against Jewish law, and they also won't be involved in fulfilling the mitzvah of puruvu, of having children. So that's why he got the number 611. But there's 611 mitzvot, and we have to assist them.
I don't understand something. It should be 612 because they're going against something don't do.
Yeah, right. No, there's a don't do and there's a do. Right. Have kids.
Okay.
I couldn't figure out 611 until it dawned on me that he was, because he mentions that the person who's gay, who does have a same-sex relationship, basically is violating the laws of homosexuality, and he's also not involved in Mr. Peru. Okay, 611. So it says 611 mitzvot. Now, people responded to Rabbi Boteach's argument saying, it's not pick and choose out of 613, it's a package. 613 mitzvot. The truth is, I wrote an article before about that on the gestalt of orthodoxy, and this is a problem that exists in Kiruv in general. A lot of times you're trying to get someone to become more observant. What you do is you say, oh, that's great, you did this one mitzvah. That's great, and you're pushing him to do one mitzvah. Take your lulav and Esther, that's really, really great. And it is great. There is a side to it that's great. They did a mitzvah. On the other hand, what's lost is the gestalt. It's not 600. It's not like a smorgasbord. I'll take a little bit of this, take a little bit of that. Then what you do is you create your own plate. There is a package here, and how many people really understand the package? And that doesn't mean, that's not meant to mean to mean you don't. You basically have to present an all or nothing concept there, but it does present, do you get that perception of the gestalt? Do you get the big picture, or you only see the little parts to it? And we don't focus on that big picture. We focus on little parts and so we don't see that big picture. And in certain ways we don't understand how where that big picture is supposed to take us.
It's also an area, he's saying, looking at an individual, so they do two mitzvahs less. And he's not looking at the society, because there's probably in discussions about how they raise children and things like that, and how that affects society.
But the fact is that I was just using this as an example on policy in general. The fact is, a lot of times we look at the specifics without looking at the general, broad perspective, and that's part of the issue. Okay, and that's something that I think we have to start thinking about, considering. The fact is a big thing, and watch all the like dominoes. Watch where all the aspects happen, and when we make decisions, we can't just do it in vacuums. We have to do it in the big context. Obviously, halacha will set parameters. The policy, the consideration is not going to change the halacha. Halacha is obviously mandatory. But as you look at it, heterim, not heterim, do you go this way, do you go that way, do you sit there and argue this way? There's a lot of room there, and there's also room to consider all the repercussions. And that's what I mean by policy, getting the big picture, and that means two ways: understanding all the consequences of the big picture, and understanding the meta-halachic picture that you are working on. That's something that I think we have to spend more time doing. And just tonight, just gave a bunch of different examples of that.